now. Good afternoon and welcome to today's talk by Ruth Nutter, which is being hosted by the charity founded by John Ruskin, the Guild of St George. Set up by him, in fact, 150 years ago this year, and designed to, in essence, make working people's lives better in the Victorian England of the Industrial Revolution. And today, essentially, this charity is dedicated to the same endeavour. The Guild is lucky enough to have three principal assets. The Ruskin collection, given by Ruskin to the working people of Sheffield, and now cared for and displayed by Museum Sheffield in the Millennium Galleries in the middle of the city. Ruskin land, 100 acres of oak woodland, orchard and farmland in the Wyre Forest, and a membership of more than 320 companions, as they're called, around the world. And I'm delighted that a number of those companions are with us today. Before I introduce Ruth, can I just go over a few protocols? Please stay muted. It will help the sort of cleanliness of the call. There will be a chance at the end of the talk to ask questions of Ruth. And if you want to ask a live question, we will just ask you to raise your hand and hold it there and then unmute yourself when you're invited to do so. But if during the course of her talk, you want to type a question into the chat function in advance, that would be helpful. And then Ruth and I can read them from the chat function. You're welcome, as Ruth has said a number of times, to have your lunch. And if you don't want to be watched having your lunch, then again, you can just close down your screen while you're doing that. But we're very aware this is people's lunch hours, and whether you're working at home or home educating or whatever you might be doing, please feel free to eat if you need to. If your screen freezes at any time, then please turn your video off. That might improve bandwidth fairly obviously. And if the whole thing goes down, if neither Ruth nor I are able to continue hosting this call, then simply come back in on the same link and we will keep the call going in that way. My name is Simon Seligman. I'm the Membership and Communications Officer for the Guild of St George. And it is my absolute delight to introduce my colleague for only sadly another couple of weeks, Ruth Nutter. Ruth Nutter is a creative producer with more than 2 decades of experience in socially engaged practice. She led the Guild of St George's 6-year Ruskin in Sheffield programme between 2014 and 2019, a programme designed to engage local communities with art, crafts, heritage, nature, and perhaps most importantly, with each other. Inspired by the themes of the Ruskin collection in Sheffield and by Ruskin's ideas about how lives can be made better. The project engaged more than 25,000 people, 30 community and cultural partners across the city of Sheffield, and more than 150 volunteers and participatory artists, many of whom either were already or subsequently inspired by their involvement have become companions of the Guild. At the end, the programme was externally evaluated, which in turn led to her book, Paradise is Here, which the Guild was very proud to publish last autumn. And there will be a link in the chat as how you can go about reading more about the book and indeed buying a copy for yourself. And Ruth's talk today is based upon that book. So I'm now going to hand over to her. Can I suggest that you all pin the video of Ruth talking so that she appears as the chief part of your screen. She'll also be sharing some images during the course of her talk. Over to you, Ruth.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Hello again to everybody. Welcome again. Really fantastic to see you all. Really lovely mixture of people who I've never met before and people who've been closely involved in the Ruskin in Sheffield programme over the last 6 years. Many of them are companions of the Guild of St George. And welcome especially as well to people who are tuning in from abroad and have got up early to do that. So the first thing I'd like to do is give you just a little bit of a roadmap, just to let you know what you'll hear today. I will talk for no longer than 35 minutes to give time for questions at the end. I'm going to introduce community building and how I came to it. I'll give you some examples of socially engaged events and activities, good session on tips about the practice, and then some techniques as well. So I think I'd like to start by saying really that this is my personal take on bringing communities together. There are many great socially engaged creative community organisations around the UK to learn from, and some of them are listed in the book. I'm actually, now I've mentioned the book, I'm just going to hold it up. I thought it'd be useful to start by sharing my own pathway to becoming a socially engaged community practitioner, as people come to it from very different paths. From arts backgrounds, heritage backgrounds, community, environment, campaigning, and some of you will be practitioners, but the principles for success are probably fairly consistent. I've personally come at it from a fairly arts theatre background. So I started out in marketing roles, bringing audiences to theatre at the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester and the Tricycle Theatre in London, and then worked as a producer for Nottingham Playhouse and a touring company called The People Show. Then I co-formed a company called Push, which commissioned new work from Black British artists and brought new audiences into venues, including the Young Vic, the Almeida Theatre and Sadler's Wells in London. So this was sort of great in terms of bringing people together and bringing people to art, but I really wanted to shift from bringing communities into cultural venues to working in communities on their own terms. So unearthing their interests and needs where they lived. And I was fortunate to work for a few years with an amazing community arts practice called Encounters, who were based in Sheffield, and we took over empty shops around the UK to invite people to share the joys and challenges of what it meant to live in that place. And that's where I developed a really strong sense of how you invite people to join in, which is what this practice is all about, the joining in where you live here now. So it's about paradise is here. Paradise isn't somewhere that we escape to, it's somewhere that we have the collective capacity to make where we live together. So the techniques that I've used for bringing local communities together have ranged from local walks to collective street mural making to fully programmed residencies in disused spaces for months. And they are all acts of community engagement. But if you can work in one community for a few years, and with Ruskin in Sheffield, we were fortunate to be able to engage in the same neighbourhoods for up to 5 years, then the depth and the breadth of engagement can really start to build community rather than just engage community. So you have the opportunity to deepen and broaden connections, strengthen identity, equip people with skills, with confidence, and really give people agency to act where they live. So if you don't have the scope to embed yourself in a neighbourhood for a few years, that really doesn't matter. The important thing is to weave the threads and layers, as many as you can, of community activity across one place over the time that you've got, and that will start to reap rewards. Obviously, we're in very different times from when Ruskin in Sheffield took place. It was the 6 years pre-COVID, and I started writing the book just as we went into lockdown. I did wonder if it was going to be the most irrelevant or relevant book that anyone could wish for. I think what we can see now, obviously, is that we gradually come out of lockdown. Communities will need ways to gently be drawn back out of their heads and out of their homes again. And most of the events and activities in the book are outdoor focused and can be adapted to work with fewer participants and according to safety guidelines as restrictions ease. So while you're engaging with local communities, if you're doing it successfully, you're in constant conversation with them anyway, so that you're co-creating events together. So in a way, you're tailoring all the time. So tailoring to COVID is just another layer of tailoring. I don't think I've ever done two events the same. So yes, we're just doing more tailoring in times of COVID. So to move on to some specific examples of socially engaged events and activities, just to understand what the difference is between just an event or a cultural event and a socially engaged one. There were over 70 events throughout Ruskin and Sheffield, which were all designed to reconnect people with their creativity, their local nature, their heritage, the built environment, and most importantly, with each other. And most of them were underpinned by a socially engaged arts approach. And to give you a definition, because it is helpful to have a definition of this, the Tate defines socially engaged practice as a practice which can include any art form which involves people and communities in debate, collaboration, or social interaction. And the participatory element of socially engaged practice is key, with artworks created often holding equal or less importance to the collaborative act of creating them. So I'll just share with you a few images of some of our anchor projects and the distinctive features about them, just to show how wide-ranging they can look. So just for a moment, I will share my screen. So this is the pop-up Ruskin Museum in Walkley, which was our first major project in 2015. And it was situated in Walkley because Ruskin's St George's Museum and the Ruskin collection, his remarkable collection of minerals, artworks, paintings, illustrated books for the workers of Sheffield, was a stone's throw away from where this empty shop is. What we really wanted to do was bring the heritage of the museum alive, but really more importantly, the spirit of creativity. So people could wander in there. It was there for 6 months, learn about the museum, but more importantly, make, sew, chat, read, sculpt, and we really involved lots of local partners. The local baker gave dough for people to sculpt from. It involved a lot of the local community, and a lot of local ownership took place as because of that, and people could suggest exhibitions or suggest activities they wanted to take place, and it was very community led. It was hosted by 10 volunteers who were trained, and actually this project won a UK award for the best community project for the Association for Heritage Interpretation Awards in 2017. So this multi-layered approach, when you're in residency for a long time, that's what you can achieve. A much shorter residency was 3 weeks, which was on the Moor, which is in the city centre of Sheffield. It's a shopping street with the new indoor markets had recently been completed, and it was Sheffield's year of making. So we devoted this to 3 weeks of craftsmanship. There was a beautiful sculpture inside that mobile pop-up, which had been in a craftsmanship exhibition at the Millennium Gallery. People could sit in that, chat, talk about what they could make, where they came from. They could work with professional craftspeople. There were voluntary hosts, and this was really all about giving people a chance to pause in what is normally a kind of a highly consuming shopping environment. Pause, chat, talk about what they made, what they loved making. So that was what that was what you could do in 3 weeks. Oh, sorry, it doesn't seem to be moving on. Yeah, so the next one, the Ruskin Museum makeover at Meersbrook Hall. This is Meersbrook Hall in Meersbrook Park, which is a Grade 2 listed building. It used to be the Ruskin Museum for a period of time until 1953. And it had been recently vacated by Sheffield City Council, and Healy Trust and Friends of Meersbrook Hall had taken it over and were wanting to revive it to a sort of a thriving community hub. So we were working with them to help them do that. So after months of research, we did a week-long public event to transform some of the rooms, to give the flavour and the spirits of the museum, and again to offer a lot of creative activity, mainly connected with nature and the park. So it was really kind of reviving the idea of this as a whole well-being area, which Healy Trust have obviously been doing for years already themselves. And this is the outdoor projection on the opening night. This is Park Centre Community Garden, is a garden just near the city centre, behind Park Hill, near Park Hill Flats, and it's a fantastic community garden which had already been created out of rubble by this group of gardening volunteers, and we connected with them around their creativity because there were lots of kind of highly creative people within the group, and so to develop that artistry we work with an artist, Jason I think, who's watching today, and he showed them how to make these metal artworks which they really love doing, and they're now displayed in the garden. Garden got very overgrown during those 2 months while they were working on that artworks instead. So that was just a different approach. Again, another different approach that we took was to commission a company called the Bear Project, an immersive theatre company, to create the People's Palace of Possibility that you can see there, which was an installation that people walked into and engaged with. They could express their hopes and fears about the future of the planet, write dream policies, argue and discuss them, sculpt utopian elements of the world they'd like to see out of clay and sow seeds of resistance. That was the 3 weeks at Theatre Delhi. So that was the first time we moved out of a more sort of community space. And we realised that it could be adapted to being community spaces, which is what it should have been touring to right now. But instead, this has actually been adapted to a part mail out, part digital Palace of Possibility at the moment. So that's another way of working, is commissioning people to do that. One of the final events we did was we created this 50-metre street mural collectively in an inner city area of Sheffield that was being regenerated near Yorkshire Art Space Studios. And so this took 2 professional artists and 300 members of the local community to create it in one day. Well, the artists painted the background over a couple of weeks, but over 300 people engaged. And really that sort of sense of breaking down barriers for all of those people who sort of drifted through that area at various times, especially at lunch times, but actually to bring them together, it really broke down barriers. So that was just some examples there. And there's more information in the case studies in the book about some of those key anchor projects. I mean, obviously, when we were working on these projects, because of the Ruskin collection connection, our focus was very much inspired by Ruskin's concerns in the Victorian era about our disconnection with art, nature, heritage and each other. But these are still globally relevant themes today and very strong to work with. I would urge anyone to work with those themes. I think they resonate even more strongly at the moment. The important thing, though, is that you find ways that the themes of the heritage or the art or the place that you're interested in chime with the needs and the interests of the local communities that you want to work with. So it's that marrying of interests and genuine curiosity that is really important. So I suppose what I want to emphasise is that community engagement needs to be treated as a process as much as a series of events and activities. So success is rooted in offering the right framework for people to join in as much as the right activities. So having said that, after doing this for years, I definitely have some key tips, practical tips to planning community engagement activity. If you're new to this guidance will cover what to consider when planning community engagement activity, but it's always valuable to work with a professional practitioner to make sure that the whole thing stands up creatively and practically, and so that you know that you're working within event safety guidelines, especially regarding COVID. So tip 1 is our place. Start with where you live. So it sounds really obvious, but this sense of being in the place that people live is really important. So for example, the pop-up Ruskin Museum was in a local empty shop. So it was a place that people had an association with, but it looked different. It started empty and it filled up with things that people collected, people that things had sewn or drawn, or community journals that they had been filling in, just diaries of things that had been happening to them. And it was also the hub of street performances, of riverside walks, of heritage talks, of all sorts of events that were going on that year. So the power of doing it in that place, it means that those conversations that happened, any of those connections that are made, the confidence that is built is rooted in that place. So it is very different to planning or talking about it somewhere else. It's happening here. Very central to that is having somewhere, there's a central table, a space that people can come in and talk and chat. Without that, it really is nothing. If there is not an exchange, you know, despite what people may leave behind in terms of what they made, if there haven't been those kind of, that is the glue, and that glue needs to happen in the place that people live. Really breaks down barriers for people that maybe don't go into town, don't want to go to another place to engage or with any form of culture or with other people. So being walkable breaks down huge barriers. So again, this sense that paradise is here. Making paradise here. Tip 2 is very public places. So this is about being visible in daily life. All of these events, we really try and make them visible on people's daily routes, in parks, on streets, places that people literally have to stumble across to get to it. We do very little promotion. I suppose there's some fairly forms of traditional promotion of publicity and some social media when these things are happening, but most people that come are coming because they're on their way to the shops, or because they're on their way to the park, or they're walking the dog. And so that's what it really, yeah, that really brings it into their life. Outdoors is great. It's particularly great at the moment because I think the more outdoor events we can plan, the better. It also, I always think it does 90% of the work. That if you're doing, you know, for example, when we did the big draw festivals, when we did them outdoors and across parks, just whatever you're doing, if you're doing it outdoors, it just completely shifts, you know, the kind of the level of well-being that it can bring. So in terms of public places, so for example, the collective street mural that I showed you on Exchange Street, because you're putting yourself into public places, it's always more complicated. You've got to work with a lot of people. So we asked the council who we needed to work with to use the hoardings. And we spoke to they put us in touch with the construction company and the road workers who were working in that area at the time. So we all had to work together to make it work and make it work safely. And they were incredibly helpful and supportive. So then people see them being engaged. It means that they feel comfortable. They're walking out from their office at lunchtime, or they're just kind of literally hanging around that area for the day. It just kind of says, oh, this is something for us. And we had so much great feedback around that, that it just completely broke down barriers, and it just made that area suddenly feel like a place that it was okay for all of those people to be. Tip 3, pop up, think and do things differently. So pop-up gives you this amazing permission to do things quite differently, bring something new to a place. People understand that it's only going to be there for a short time, so it's a novelty. They know that there's going to be something new. It's not going to be there for long, so people are more inclined to just drop in and have a look. The design is important to get people across the threshold. So it's this mix that I always talk about of ordinary and extraordinary. So it needs to be, yes, quite beautiful in one way, but in an everyday way. If things just look too different or too arty, I think it can really stop a lot of people thinking that it's okay for them just to drop across the threshold. So that ordinary extraordinary mix is really important, and really appeals to more diverse audiences, because it's not a place that someone says, well, this is for me. You know, it's a place that for 10 years has had a reputation for being this or that. It's, you know, it's a space that we can all just go into, and it's just here for a few weeks. So for example, the Ruskin's Youth and Beauty Parlour, where anybody could come in while they were shopping, and quite often people did try and leave kids with us while they went shopping, but that wasn't okay. So they had to stay with them, which is quite an important aspect of this work. People will often go, oh, just pop off, leave the kids. So that opportunity to chat for different generations, to chat about making, what they maybe skills that they'd lost or skills that they'd been redundant from using. That's, you know, all of that is taking place over those few weeks. And although it's only short-lived, it was only there for 3 weeks, but what you start to collect is the things that people have drawn and the comments that they've made. And even in 3 weeks, we had hundreds, literally hundreds of sort of traces of everybody who had been into the parlour, into the Youth and Beauty Parlour, and invited local stakeholders back and people who'd been involved on that final day. So these pop-up spaces are actually really powerful in terms of civic development, and actually bringing sort of civic leaders and people in to see at the end what's been created, and see what the views are of you know, everybody who's taken part. Having a sort of a pop-up event somewhere, like on a shopping street in particular, they're just really powerful ways of very, very quickly modelling other ways of doing things. So very quickly, people were coming in there at lunchtime, the council offices at Moorfoot, lots of council workers came in and popped in and said it was really nice to make or do something in their lunch hour. And so very quickly, you know, spaces can become about something else. Their identity can be shifted quite quickly. And I think at a time when everyone's looking at reinventing the high street, it's a really powerful tool. One important thing to point out, is just a practical thing, is that, you know, in sort of shopping areas, they're often privately owned, not publicly owned. So when you're looking for permission, the council's often the first place to go, but there are quite a few private companies that own different areas, certainly in Sheffield. Tip 4 is plenty of paper. This is about creativity being at the heart of things. And I know probably quite a few of you who are here today are quite creative by nature anyway. But how you do things creatively, using, we used sort of drawing and those kind of activities at every event that we did. And ideal materials are wallpaper lining, cardboard, small pieces of card. People don't like drawing, if they don't think that they can draw, just having a little small piece of card. We did thousands of those, and people are really prepared to have a go. People really enjoy drawing natural materials, and it just gives them a connection with. We didn't ever come across anyone who wasn't sort of attracted by the minerals and the fossils and the feathers and things that we had out that people could draw. And the whole point with all of this is, well, partly that people just don't have those materials at the ready at home and all beautifully laid out. You don't need loads, you do need it beautifully laid out so that people feel that they can just come and sit and have a go. And the important thing, have different levels of difficulty so that different generations, that a parent can drop in at the same time as a child, that everyone can be occupied. There's different levels that people feel, oh yeah, that's for me, I could have a go at that. And that the key thing is that this creative activity is what gives the connectivity. The activity on its own is fine, but if you don't have the activity in the conversation, you don't have the connectivity. So that's the thing to think about all the time. Tip number 5 is putting it simply. So invite openly and instruct clearly. When people come into these spaces where there's activities going on, this written information and instruction is really important for people who prefer to look, don't want to join in straight away, don't want to be approached by somebody, and you don't want to lose them as soon as they come in. We've often used big chalkboard signs for that, keeps it really simple, but styles change for the kind of signage that people like. So the key thing is to strike the tone of the place, steer clear of jargon, and keep sentences short. Tip number 6 is in partnership. This is about working closely together. And really, you can only do this work with other groups, with other organisations and individuals, as it has to be more about the community than what you or your organisation want to offer. You just can't do it alone by definition. So, for example, the outdoor projection that you saw in one of the images at Mearsbrook Hall, anyone can do an outdoor projection. You can project something beautiful, exciting, dramatic, whatever. But if it hasn't been made by or including people locally, it's not the same level of community engagement. So the projection that we put up there was a mixture of images of the past from the museum, some recent community activity that we'd been doing with a local school. They'd been creating their own collection, their own Ruskin collection, and putting it up inside the hall, just inspired by the things that they wanted to draw and make. And there were some newly commissioned videos by professional artists that were shown. We showed them all on the same night. So in that moment where you show that projection, and hundreds of people appeared in the park because, they knew that maybe they were going to be in that film. And so you really feel change is possible. It's not just about creating a sort of a flashy artwork. It's about creating an artwork that really means something to that community. But I also think that the quality of that artwork also needs to be high. So that's partnership. We work with over 30 community and cultural partners altogether across Sheffield to make this happen. Tip 7, get personal, which is about connecting with care. So for people to be drawn out of themselves and come and engage with you and connect more widely with the world, they really have to feel that somebody cares. And I think even more so post-lockdown. And a vital part of the work, which I've mentioned before, is about hosting it well. So we trained 10 hosts who all became companions of the Guild at the Pop-Up Museum in 2015. And those hosts went on to work on many other events. So did many other volunteers and companions went on. But I think because they had that grounding at the beginning, they were able to go and work on any event. And really, we could not have done it without you all. It was fantastic. So there is a bit more information in the book about that kind of sort of basic level training, because all of the people who are volunteering in that capacity can facilitate an awful lot of creative engagement. You don't have to be a professional artist. You work with professional artists to deliver maybe a very specific activity which you can't deliver if you're not a professional artist, and that is, you know, that's irreplaceable. But there is also scope for people to be encouraging and just encourage people to have a go. So the 4 key things I think with the hosting is the welcome over the threshold. So how you actually invite people, and you literally have to give everybody an equal welcome and not assume that somebody might want to engage more than somebody else. Everybody's hovering around for a reason, so they all need to be welcomed over the threshold with body language as well as verbally. It's really important to explore alongside visitors. So this is very different to just giving out activities or, you know, and just letting everyone get on with it. It's that gently chatting, that social engagement, finding out what matters to people is really important while you're doing it. Knowing your ground rules. These spaces are often, you know, if they're in public places or they're outdoors, they're places where people don't know what the rules are quite. So being really clear about the ground rules for yourselves, your hosts and the visitors, and knowing what they are. So letting people know when they've gone over the edge is really important. So that kind of sense of safety first for hosts and visitors is really vital, because if people don't feel safe in those environments, they won't undertake some of the more curious or challenging activities. Tip 8, the final tip, plan patiently, take time and more time. So this is really about spending time listening, finding out what local community groups, individuals and venues are interested in. You know, if you're interested in an area, walk the streets, go to their advertised events. I went to lots of different sort of community meetings that I just saw advertised, and you pop up and then you can start to get to know people and let them know that you're interested in working creatively. What might they be interested in? And so we really spent months in 2014 before we started this project. I spent a lot of time just going to different community events to sort of see where the fits might be. And this process builds trust. So by the time a couple of years ago, we did a big draw in Walkley across 12 locations, from bakery shops, the cemetery, the library, Ruskin Park, all of these places around Walkley, was because we had built up this trust over the last few years, you know, with everybody. You know, these things, I suppose, they just don't appear out of nowhere, or they kind of feel quite forced if they do sometimes. So in a way, although the event is everything, but the event is also just the icing on the cake. The work has already been done. If you've got to that point, you've probably done the work. So that's the tips on the practice. And then I just wanted to round off with just a few handy techniques, because as I've said, I always feel that the activities need to be matched to the process. It's quite hard to say, oh, here's a sort of a shopping list of activities, but there are some which are tried and tested, which I think are really lovely, and we've used them over the last few years. So one is sowing seeds. It's a really obvious activity, but having just kind of really well prepared plant pots and seeds, and doing that activity in spring with people who are maybe passing by. It's a really nice future facing activity, connects people with nature. And the idea is to really ask people, what do they want to grow? As in, what would they like to develop? What would they like to see happen in the future? And just write that onto like something like a little lolly stick, put it into the pot, and then the plant will grow. This is good for longer residencies, because where people can keep coming back, they can show friends and family that their plant is growing in the window. In Walkley, we then planted it out onto the pavement, so you have a planter, and it's just a really human way of finding out what people want to happen locally in the future without having to consult them. You can just go and look and see, have a look how their plant is growing and see what it is they wanted to grow. So that's one. Another favourite of mine is called Please Return Me, which is something I learned when I was with Encounters, which is having objects that you hide out in the community or the neighbourhood within walking distance and wherever your base is. And it's invited with a little message on it, inviting people to come to you. And then you have an opportunity to engage with them more, and you get amazing levels of turnout and honesty with these things. People just bring them back. So at Mearsbrook Hall, we were lucky, we were working with some students in architecture at the University of Sheffield, and they created some beautiful laser cut birds, very accurately, of all the different local species of birds, and hung them around the park on trees or on the ground. And it just said, please just, return me to Meersbrook Hall. And so during that week when we were there and we were doing the makeover, we had hundreds of people coming with their birds to sort of hang them back on this nest and find out what's happening at the hall. So it's a very easy, it's a bit of a gimmick, but it's an easy way of getting people to, come to you. And the final one that I love is Instamatic. It's just having this Instamatic camera at events. It's great because when people have maybe made something and it's taken them a bit of time to do that and to build up their confidence, they've made it, and they're just, people are really proud of making things. And then you just have a little Instamatic snap. They can see straight away what that looks like. You can display it in the pop-up space, whatever space you're in. So you sort of build up this gallery of people who've been taking part. It's a great way of documenting the diversity of people that are coming into your space, see who came in and what they did. And people like to come back and bring friends and family to sort of show photos of themselves up and come and take it away again at the end. And really all of this is about people enjoying these interactions. It's about people having a presence where they live and wanting to connect. So anything that adds that element of fun and enjoyment is so important. And even as we sort of never mistake the fact that there's an enjoyable environment, it doesn't mean that difficult conversations can't be had. In fact, the more enjoyable the environment, the more difficult conversations you can have. And we heard that especially during the People's Palace of Possibility event, that people were saying, I'm able to talk about climate, I'm able to talk about money, things that I think I'm going to really upset my friends and family to talk about. So creating those welcome environments feels very important just now. So before we move on to Q&A, I just wanted to say a few thank yous because this is my final event for the Guild as creative producer. So I wanted to thank all the directors and all the companions, as many of you here today, as I leave the Guild to embark on new freelance community projects. But in the meantime, I'd just like to ask if there are any questions and answers or anything you want me to expand on or insights of your own in terms of social engagement that you would like to share. That would be very welcome.
Ruth, thank you. There are 4 questions already in the chat, so I'm going to read them out to you and encourage others as you're listening. If you want to add a question to the chat, that, given the number of people on the call, is going to be the easiest way of making sure we don't miss anyone having their hand up. But let's kick off with a question. I'll do them in the order they were written, from Magda. How inclusive do you think the activities were, for example, for disabled people?
So, good question. I'd say it varied depending on which project it was. So the empty shop in Walkley, we actually had a disabled artist in residence, a wheelchair using artist in residence, and so she found it a really excellent space to be working in. And yes, we chose it because it had a shop front that was very accessible. The pavements in Walkley itself and around there is a less accessible area, but we made sure that the space was somewhere that everybody could come into. Similarly, I'd say the most inclusive from every aspect and accessible space was the pop-up parlour that we had on the moor in Sheffield, which was specially designed by, it was some graduate architect students who had been given a brief to design something that was specifically really, really accessible. And this sense of having really open space that people don't, because they're not quite sure what things are sometimes, if they can see right through it and they can see they can get out the other side easily if they want to, that's really important. And so that was the most accessible space we had, and location, as you probably know, is a really vital part of that. Tricky when you're working in old buildings sometimes, and Meersbrook Hall was tricky from that point of view. But everywhere else that we've worked, we were in public parks, predominantly outdoors or in very accessible venues. Is that okay, Magda? Did you want to ask anything else about that?
Okay, I think I'll move on to the next question from Bev.
Hey, Dave, I've not answered it. If there's anything else you want to ask after I've answered, just please unmute yourself and ask.
So Magda's asked in the chat, were you able to add up how many? I'm guessing she means how many people with disability engaged with the project.
I don't know. I would say it was No, I don't have an exact number, but from when we were, certainly when we were on the moor at the Youth and Beauty Parlour, I would say quite a high proportion of, we had a couple of thousand people, and I would say probably 5% of people were, we had a lot of people with wheelchair users and also people with prams, but a lot of wheelchair users coming in. During that project, because it was so easy, and it's a really accessible part of town, so people, if people with disabled people will often shop in around the moor because it is such an accessible area.
Okay, so question from Bev. All of these amazing activities are highly interactive, place-based activities. Do you think a similar level of success can be achieved using digital technologies? One, and also, how do you measure the success of your place-based activities?
So the first question, digital. My honest answer is no, that I don't think it can replace it. I think it's had a fantastic role to play during lockdown and will continue to, and that kind of blended approach of people being able to do a mixture as well. I think what people crave, I think this was even before lockdown, was this kind of physical connection, and not this siloing. I think we already had quite a siloed lives in society, which has become potentially more so. So I think it just doesn't address, and I think we've probably all felt it a lot more over the last few months, that actually what we really yearn, you can meet online, and when you meet in person, it's not just that you make a nice connection, you actually feel that you get to meaning much quicker, and it's because we're just, that is what we miss most. And certainly I've been working with Healy Trust in connection with them over the last few months, and they've been working with 700 households around Healy, and what they're all craving is human and face-to-face. What was, sorry, the second question was?
The second question was, how do you measure the success of your place-based activity?
What we did in terms of measuring the success of Ruskin in Sheffield was, I worked with an evaluator, Cara Sutherland, who is here today, and we measured our success against Ruskin's, sort of, they were Ruskinian outcomes. I'm just trying to get to them. So we measured them against his sort of maxims of beliefs. No wealth but life. So we measured it against fair and equal enjoyment of the world around us. We measured it against promoting craft, good livelihoods and care of land. We measured it against not for present use alone, which was about creating and conserving for future generations, and about the extent to which we'd help people go to nature. So we measured that success by asking the 30 community and cultural partners for their feedback, and also we used, of the 25,000 people we engaged, we had hundreds, probably about 500 responses, which we gathered, from visitor books and from surveys that we'd done, and sort of gathered them into those areas. And we were sort of successful, I think, to different extents in different communities, depending on whether they were most concerned in, accessing nature or accessing creativity. So I won't go into all the details now, but you can actually access that evaluation on the Guild website. Is that right, Simon?
Yep.
Because it's a really good question, because we had to work out how to retrospectively, how did we evaluate? We didn't know the programme was going to last 6 years when we started. So we had to retrospectively work out how to evaluate it. We had to do it by, we were working to Ruskin's ideas. So we had to use his ideas as our measures of success.
So following on from that, I'm just going to jump a question, because this is connected to what you've just said, from Sarah Haythorne-Thwaite. What is the legacy of the programme? What is the result, or what's been left behind? And then also, is the programme continuing?
So what was left behind in each community, again, I am going to refer back to the evaluation, actually, because I talk about that, about the legacy in each community. The main legacy, so if I just quickly touch on each one, in Walkley, it was a much, all of the community organisations which I had assumed were working quite closely together, because there are lots of very good, very active organisations, said that actually what this did was this brought them working together. So it really strengthened the network and the resilience of organisations in that community, and really accessed new audiences for them. And they still work in terms of legacy. I think Chris is here from Walkley Carnegie Library. They've actually used the sort of the whole basis of the Ruskinian heritage as a way to underpin how they've been planning the future of the library, so that in a sense it's become the new local beacon of creativity. So that's in Walkley, that was the legacy there. There's very sort of specific legacies in each community. In terms of Park Centre, Community Garden, they were already working with creativity and nature in their kind of well-being projects, but actually it really strengthened the value of art in their offer of activities. So they've embedded that much more strongly and feel that that's literally one of them, that's the most important tool that they've got to use in terms of increasing well-being locally. In terms of Meersbrook, really the legacy there was we just hugely built momentum around Meersbrook Hall, and this sense that it could be this thriving community resource. The legacy was this complete sort of synergy of Ruskin's ideas of making beautiful, peaceful, fruitful places to live. And when we were sort of, talking to Healy Trust about that, they were just saying, wow, well, that's exactly, those are exactly the principles that we're kind of working to. It's exactly the approach we're taking. And the Guild is still working with Healy Trust, and the Healy Trust are now sort of experimenting. Well, they have been working with social prescribing for a long time, and the Guild's been working with them to work out how can we use those sort of Ruskinian, that sort of polymath approach of arts, nature, creativity, craftsmanship, into how can we embed that in social prescribing for well-being today. Sorry, it wasn't very articulate, but that's the legacy at Meersbrook, is that it underpins the whole regeneration thinking in some ways around the whole Healy area. I'm not going to cover all of them, but it'll just take too long. But so the legacy, is documented in the book of what was left in each community. I think in terms of the Ruskin collection itself, for anyone who works with heritage, it completely reimagined, reinvented what how useful the Ruskin collection could be today, and that those ideas, it kind of, the legacy was that there was a sense in the city that we had this heritage collection. And I think for Museum Sheffield and for the wider community and for the Guild, there's this sense that actually there are these really exciting, globally relevant political ideas of Ruskin's, and especially around wealth divide and well-being, that had not been associated with the collection before. So it's kind of, really refreshed the sort of the more activist use of his ideas and of the collection.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions, Ruth.
Well, they're all good ones. There's no
great.
That's good.
Great questions. So from Janine, any advice on adapting this kind of activity for remote rural areas, particularly the added issues of accessibility?
Yes, I think in a way, a lot of it is to do with the questions that you ask. Because we did these in parks as well, and I know that's not the same as a rural area, but people still have the same still have the same desire, connect, and to answer the important questions of our time. That doesn't change whether you're in a rural village or in a city centre, I don't think. And sort of in terms of the case studies, especially if you look at the pop-up museum, in the book I just layer exactly what kinds of questions and a bit more about the art of asking the right question. And I know you're quite creative anyway, Janine, so it's just that sense of, if you're asking the right question, you will then work out the right activity to attach to that. So of course, you're not necessarily going to get people walking there in the same way, but I suppose that with the Guild, there's Ruskin land in the Wire Forest, which obviously only certain people can walk to. If you live in the village nearby, you've got those issues of transport and of people sort of travelling further afield. but I just think if you've got a public transport route, put it on that. Don't even consider putting it anywhere else. Even if there's only one bus a day, you know, consider doing that and encouraging people to cycle and walk. I haven't done anything in a really rural location, so I can't answer exactly, but I think you can be confident that the kind of questions that we've been asking and that are asked and they're in the book, you know, are kind of relevant to everybody.
Thank you. So we've had a question from Melanie. Please, can you talk a little about financing projects? So, for example, were architectural students, graduates working for free for their own development? How have you demonstrated accountability to funding partners? We understand that you use the Ruskin criteria, but how did you navigate the criteria that other funders might have had?
Well, no, it's a good question about funding. We, you know, our major funders were National Lottery Heritage Fund and Arts Council England, and then we had a number of smaller trusts and foundations as well. In terms of the accountability to them, on, you know, I don't know if you've, Melanie, I don't know if you've probably done lots of funding applications, but you have to give the different criterias that you're going to be evaluated against for every single project. So we weren't necessarily using those Ruskinian outcomes, those goals, for those ones. That was one that that was our own goals that we used to reflect on the entire 6-year programme. So for, you know, for the Arts Council one, say for the Youth and Beauty Parlour, you know, we had to engage a certain number of people around craftsmanship and, you know, certain kinds of audiences. So really for each individual application, we were saying what we would achieve, which would be quite different and tailored to each application. I'm sorry if I don't know if that quite answers the question, but you know, it was just the same, I suppose, with any arts project, which they're all arts-based projects. Then, you know, we had to say what we were going to achieve in each one.
I'll just speak if that's okay. I'm sorry, yeah, I've not got the camera on because I'm not very well. So, right. But you're being generous. I'm trying to write my first funding bid, so that's why it's quite a naive question maybe, but I think I understand a little more from your answer, which is about looking at Venn diagrams of measurable criteria and what have you, and trying to mix and match and look at our own goals and then looking at how we can possibly correlate that with external funding so that we don't lose. What I don't want to do is lose our own vision when having to align ourselves with others, if that makes sense. Yeah, and a bit of a question about how much you manage to get other people to work for free when I don't want to work for free myself, you know what I mean?
No, that's a good point. We have a mixture of sort of paid and people working voluntarily on the events. Generally people who were managing things, or we were using their artistic expertise. We paid them as professional practitioners. And then we had a lot of voluntary facilitators who worked across events, and they joined in because they were doing something, I think. So you could, you know, I don't want to speak on all their behalf, there's lots of people here, but because you want to do something in your own community, because it develops things for yourself, because it's social, and, you know, quite a creative, constructive environment to be volunteering in, which you can probably offer on your project. So you asked about the students in particular. So the students that we worked on, I think we gave them something towards their technical costs, but they'd already been commissioned to build that mobile structure. So we were like the guinea pigs. It wasn't specially commissioned for us. We were just the first people to use it. So they'd already been paid to do that. And they wanted to showcase it. So they weren't charging for their time. It was its first outing. So the answer is it's always in the detail with all of these kind of voluntary and paid on projects.
Thank you.
Application.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that is all of the questions that have been written in the chat, and there's some lovely messages of appreciation, Ruth. I'll save them all for you. And gratitude, and people with food for thought to go away with, and some good tips from people about transport and organisations offering different projects in different ways. So thank you. Let's just see very quickly if anybody wants to hold their hand up, they're particularly keen to ask a question, or perhaps the quickest would be to unmute and simply say your name and then ask the question, otherwise we might miss you. Is there anybody with a final question before we finish today. We're very aware that we're coming up towards 2 o'clock. There's a question in the chat regarding permission, like from the council or retailers, to use public and or private spaces. Did you receive a lot of objections? And if so, how did you overcome them?
I always went to the Sheffield, to the City Council, literally rang the main switchboard and asked for the community team or the events team, and they would put you through to the right person. And sometimes you could verbally describe what you were doing, or the guidelines are on the Sheffield City Council website about what kind of events need what kind of licensing. But if you're unsure, because sometimes it's not really clear, I would always just speak to someone at the council and they would say, okay, you've got to fill in this long form. Or actually from what you've just described, what you submit, they'll say you don't need a license. So, but I'd be happy to chat to you about that, Anna, on anything that you were planning, but it's really getting hold of the right person at the council and looking online at their licensing forms.
Wonderful, thank you, Ruth. And I just want to respond to David, who's asked, can you say again where the recording may be made available? The answer is that we intend to put, we hope, a recording of this session on the Guild website. It'll actually be on our YouTube channel, but there'll be a link to it on the Guild website. Realistically, that won't happen until some point next week. And Ruth and I will review it first and just check before we post it. But that's the plan. So guildofstgeorge.org.uk. And then if you look into resources, there's a link to videos, and it'll be a video on that page. And we're planning quite a number of further online events through the year, some of which will be just for companions of the Guild, but the ones with a wider audience we hope to record and post as well. So I hope that's answered that question. Thank you all for all the lovely things you've written in the chat. So can I close by thanking you, Ruth, from all of us for your sharing so generously your expertise so fluently and passionately and enthusiastically and usefully, which Ruskin would have particularly approved of. As you heard from Ruth herself, this is very sadly her final event as the Guild's creative producer, as she heads off to be an independent freelancer in this field. As I think you've all heard today, Ruth has delivered something truly extraordinary for the Guild, and more importantly for Sheffield. And everyone, your colleagues, the board, and the 320 companions around the world are immensely grateful for your work and your galvanizing expertise. So a huge thank you from us all.
Thank you.
Can I thank all of you, our audience, for joining us today, and remind you that I hope I've put into the chat a number of times links to where you can read more about the book and purchase it from the Guild Bookshop, to a little film about Ruskin in Sheffield, and also to the current edition of the Big Issue North, where Ruth has an article inspired again by the book and by the project. And also Ruth's email address was put in the chat earlier on, but it's ruthmnutter@gmail.com. So if any of you want to get in touch with her directly, personally or professionally, she'd be delighted to hear from you. And with that, it only remains to say thank you and goodbye. And I'm going to stop the recording now, and we will, in the next couple of minutes, close the call.